But let me talk about all of this with Ali Soufan, former FBI Supervisory Special Agent, Reuel Gerecht, a senior fellow of the Foundation of Defensive Democracies, Michael Weiss, CNN contributor and co-author of ISIS Inside the Army of Terror, and Robert Pape, director of the Chicago Project on Terrorism at the University of Chicago. So, Robert, let me actually just begin with you on a tactical side of things. When you're looking at these pictures here from this neighborhood, Scarbeck, in Brussels, you know that they're looking for something, someone. They found nails, they found chemicals, they found an ISIS flag. What are you seeing when you see these photos?
What I'm seeing is lots of information that the local community very likely had or could have known relatively easily, and is probably, the local community is probably simply suppressing or depressed to give that information, bring it forward. And I think this is the price we pay for demonizing Muslims as a group in Western Europe. We have an area where there are individuals hanging out for not just weeks, but probably months, lots of material that they're collecting to do us great harm. The local community is what we need first and foremost to provide information, and if we continue to demonize them over and over and over again as they're just terrorists anyway, then why should they help?
Ali Soufan. You know these parts of, Belgium, you were saying before the show started, in Europe, terrorists travel easier than information. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you look at the terrorist attack that happened in Paris on November 13, right? This is still the same cell. We're dealing with the same people. But there are so many legal constraints that preventing cooperation between the different European countries. We're dealing with a totally different threat that whatever, they had before, this is different. From Europe, we have 5,000, almost 5,000 foreign fighters who went to Syria and who went to Iraq. More than 30% of them came back. A small place like Brussels, a small place like Belgium, a small country like Belgium, doesn't even have the resources to deal with all these kind of things.
But it's Belgium, it's the European Union, it's NATO.
Well, and it is also Molenbeek, and it is mostly 470 foreign fighters that went, and all of them almost come from Brussels, and all of them almost come from Molenbeek. They have a problem. They have hotbeds of terrorism, and they have a situation where people can rent a car and go to France, conduct a terrorist attack to France, and come back.
Go home.
And it takes about 3, 4, 5 months to find them. So there are a lot of things the Europeans need to do today, and our hearts with all the people in Belgium and with France. But there are a problem when we see that there is no connections, that there is no coordination between the different agencies, that they don't share information because of privacy issues about their own citizens to each other. And some of these laws need to change in order to deal with the threat of terrorism as it is today in Western Europe.
Michael Weiss, we were sitting here on Friday. We were talking about the coordination, or we're hearing really from Belgium, self-congratulatory over the coordination and cooperation between France and Belgium in finding Salah Abdeslam, which was a huge get for them, that they found him and that he's alive, and that in fact he's talking. 4 days later, we sit here. At least 30 people have been killed at the airport and the subway. The timing is curious to me.
Yeah, look, I've no doubt this was in the works for weeks, if not months, right? You don't just target scout, build a TATP suicide bomb or several bombs, and then wage these coordinated attacks on the spur of a moment. The operation may have been accelerated, indeed probably likely was accelerated as a result of either the capture of Abdeslam or, frankly, what's been reported in the media, which is that, as you mentioned earlier, he's talking. If he's cooperating, he has a welter of human intelligence. This was a senior operative in ISIS, the one surviving member of a 10-man massacre ring in Paris.
But who didn't pull it off?
He didn't pull it off, but maybe his belt didn't go off. Maybe he chickened out. We do know, though, Brooke, that he was not in ill odor with ISIS. He returned back to his safe haven in Brussels. I mean, they caught him a block away from his childhood home. It's like if Mohammed Atta, if he were in a suicide bomber and he perpetrated 9/11 and survived somehow, then he moved back to Hamburg.
And it took him 4 months to find him.
Yeah, it took him 4 months to find him. Look, I just interviewed several people, one of whom, Jean-Charles Broussard, who's a French counterterrorism official, said there's 535 Belgians who've gone to Syria, of which number 200 have returned. All of Belgium is a country of, 11 million people. That's a population size a little over the size of the city of London. Each person you surveil, each terrorist suspect you surveil requires between 20 and 25 counterterrorism local law enforcement officials to monitor their activities. Ahmed Koulibaly, the kosher marketplace massacrist, the ISIS-inspired terrorist.
Got his guns right there.
He had 20 different cell phones that he used to perpetrate his 3 gun attacks, culminating in the most atrocious one of the kosher marketplace. So that means that, you know, for each phone, you needed a different team to kind of go through the signals intelligence. So giving the Belgians a little bit of their due, it's not entirely their fault. That said, I spoke to a senior U.S. intelligence officer who said to me, and I quote, dealing with the EU in general when it comes to terrorism, they've had 2 decades to sort this out. They have been fully infiltrated by radical Salafi jihadi clerics who have radicalized locally, but also by returning foreign fighters, not just from Syria and Iraq, but from the Afghan-Soviet war. In fact, a cleric there was responsible apparently for radicalizing Abdelhamid Abaoud and the Abdeslam brothers. He was known as Papa Noel because he was handing out thousands of euros for young mujahideen to go to Syria and join ISIS.
I want you to jump in on that, but I also want to, as I'm listening to you, I want to show everyone this photo. There's a surveillance photo. We have a freeze frame of it here. And so on the left side of your screen, here we go. The 2 in the black long-sleeved sweaters. These are the 2 men believed to be the suspected suicide bombers. And the man on the right, this is a wanted man. This is who, there is an active manhunt underway. We've been looking at the raids, but this is the person that, you know, Belgian and I'm sure the international law enforcement community want to find. He is considered a suspect as well. So, Reuel, when you look at this picture, and especially those gloves on the left hand, those 2 guys on the left side of your screen, what do you see?
Well, I mean, I don't think you see all that much. I mean, I think you see individuals that would match typical profiles of folks who could be suicide bombers or aren't suicide bombers. I mean, I think the real issue now is whether you are going to have discovered that these individuals were in the sights of French and Belgian security services. And if they're not, then they've got even a larger problem. If these individuals had been in their sights and in fact they were closing in on them, then, you know, this is a last gasp exercise. If in fact this is a different cell that they knew nothing about, then they have a problem. I have to say, I think the Belgian National Police, and I lived in Brussels for a number of years, they did a fairly decent job of informally covering the dicier neighborhoods, but they could only take so much stress. Certainly the Schengen Accords allowed for a lot of folks to come into these neighborhoods. These neighborhoods are not that tight-knit anymore. Most of these individuals who are radicalized do not actually even attend mosques in these communities. So the ability for the communities to actually know what's going on and for the police who are monitoring the communities to know what's going on is quite limited, actually.
All right, Reuel, Ali, you look at the picture. What do you see?
Well, I mean, I agree with what he said, and it's interesting that each one of them is wearing only a glove on the left hand, which is, it can mean so many different things. I don't want to read too much into it, but also the other person behind them, I am sure that that picture is not the only picture that they have. It's part probably from a longer CCTV, video. And they have many reasons to believe that that individual is probably a handler.
So one in a lighter colored jacket.
Yeah.
And this is a handler is a word, you know, from time
We've
in Baghdad.
seen that. We've seen that before. I mean,
Explain
even
what a handler does.
For example, in the East Africa embassy bombing, Haroun Fazul was the handler, and he is a person who was involved in the operation, in planning the operation, in casing the target. So he basically led the two suicide bombers who were not involved in any of the operational planning to their target, show them where to blow themselves up, and he left. So there is a possibility. We've seen that before with Al-Qaeda. We've seen that before with even ISIS and different plots. And there's a possibility that that individual, his job was to just show them the target.
I want to have my panel stand by. We're getting new information here on the investigation. We're also hearing from eyewitnesses both at the subway station and at the airport this morning there in Belgium. We will be right back. Breaking news on CNN. Back in a flash.